Yeah, it seemed to hear you. There. Hmm.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the relationship series. Thank you so much, Paul, for letting me know that you couldn't hear me. Okay, so hopefully you guys have gotten something to eat or snack on or to drink or something because, in our time zone, it is lunchtime. But yeah, wanted to jump in today, get started on time. So, of course, we could finish on time. And thank you guys so much again for being here with me. It's going to be a fun conversation. Disclaimer, I am not an expert in all of these things, but I am a person who is passionate about relationships, all kinds. And of course, our relationships as parents with our children and as children with our parents is one such kind of relationship. So maybe I'll do a quick intro for those who do not know me. I'm Genevieve. I am a registered psychotherapist in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I love what I do because I get to facilitate the business of relationship every day. I've been in practice since I started. And a little bit about me. I love what I do. I love to teach. I love to travel. I love food. And of course, I love relationships. So that's me. Here we are. We're going to be talking about our topic today is parents, it's not your fault, or is it? So obviously, we'll be talking about parent relationships and want to start us off today with just a few sort of grounding um, stats, maybe a little bit of information about parents. And then we'll get into, just some conversation. It's very informal. Really just want to talk, share our stories, share our opinions, share our ideas, and then, of course, be able to come up with something that we can take with us. So we'll jump in real quick. I just have a few slides for us, and then you guys can feel free to interrupt and interject. There will be likely some, sort of questions that come up along the way. So we'll start off with a very basic definition of a parent: a person who gives birth to or raises a child, person who brings up or cares for a child. So many of us have children, and so we are doing this now. And of course, all of us have parents, and so we've experienced this on some level, in some way, in some capacity, whether it was sufficient or insufficient in our families of origin growing up, right? So we had guardianship. Some of us have had really difficult upbringings. Perhaps there have been foster parents or adoptive parents, or we've had to be taken away from our parents and had other people or other family members or guardians take care of us. So there's a lot as that goes into an expanded definition of parent, but we're going to stick with this sort of very basic one, and then we'll sort of go from there. I'm sure you guys can locate yourselves within your own experience. So this is a disclaimer. The title is a little bit misleading because our goal is not actually to like find fault or blame anybody. It's really not to say like, parents, it's all your fault for all the issues that I have. But it really is just to open the conversation about some of the thoughts and ideas that have formed on the inside of us, and some of perhaps the emotions that we haven't had a chance to process, um, and perhaps find language to describe, or even space where it's acceptable to say things like this, right? So yeah, I think yeah, it's an open conversation, perhaps just to grow an awareness of our own underlying beliefs or limitations concerning parenting, and the impact of parenting on our adult lives, as well as our role as parents, who are impacting and affecting our children's lives. So um, I'll call for grace and some openness, and perhaps even more of like a mindful stance as we engage in this conversation, to really just sort of pause and be noticing of what is happening for you, like what you're observing, what you're perceiving, all this stuff like internally, and to do so in a non like judgmental way. So if like troubling thoughts or assumptions or ideas or like a visceral response comes up, like that's wrong, like I don't believe that. Yeah, just to sort of notice it, and to hold it, we'll say that. So we want to call to our attention some of the troubling maybe schemas that we might have, um, and sometimes they might be damaging as well. But really holding them in a way that allows for us to be thoughtful about it, for us to learn from it, um, and then if the situation calls, then we can also sort of lean into it and take responsibility for addressing it or doing something about it. So really just want to have that stance as we go into the conversation, because um, sometimes when we talk about touchy issues, like things come up and then, we don't know where to go, what to do with them. So yeah, just really taking a moment to allow ourselves to be open, to approach this with a mindful stance, to listen to what we're hearing, and share different opinions and be open to hearing other people's opinions. So this is what we're starting with. Our overview, we're going to look at a few parenting theories, look at some interesting findings, just a couple of stats, authority and attachment, and then a personal challenge. And then we'll look at next week, and then we can throw out any additional questions. But of course, I'll be asking a whole bunch of questions as we go. So we want to locate ourselves in a few sort of historical ideas as it relates to parenting. I have an internal sort of framework, and it distinguishes between psychology and theology as it pertains to parenting. And historically, I think we have an idea about parents. Like, parents are supposed to, fill in the blank, and then children are supposed to fill in the blank, right? We have some constructs and ideas that have been formed for us or given to us based on our own family of origin experience, based on our belief systems, based on our exposure to media. I know I grew up on the Cosby Show. I may be dating myself, but I grew up on the Cosby Show, and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and just depictions of family and parenting that were appealing, right? But here I want to ground us in some sort of historical and perhaps more maybe overarching ideas as it relates to parenting relationships. So the first quote there is from the Bible. It's Proverbs 22 and verse 6. It says, "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So that is a schema or a view of parenting, right? Parents are supposed to fill in the blank, train up a child in the way that he should go. And so as children, we don't have this framework. We are the child. And so we are receiving this training up, so to speak. And so our parents, based on whatever they were exposed to or whatever they thought was right, would then deliver to us what they thought was appropriate training. So that is a worldview that many of us come from, right? Spare the rod, spoil the child, and discipline and all that good stuff, as parents. And so it may not always be the most comfortable to accept as children growing up, but when we become parents, we kind of understand a little bit more, right? And then the second quote is actually from Sigmund Freud. He's the father of psychology, so to speak, and so he's done extensive studies and research on parents and children, and he's got all the ideas, and some of them really great, some of them not so great, that we've had to dispel over the years. But either way, here's just a very basic statement, right? And I think most of us can perhaps agree with this statement. Parents play a defining role in shaping the personalities and emotional and mental health of their children. Okay. So it's not necessarily if they play a role, it's sort of more closely aligned with the question of how much of a role do they play, and how can we, as children and parents, children of parents and parents of children, how can we use that to our benefit, or perhaps how have we perhaps not noticed and it's been to our detriment? Okay, so yeah, I want to sort of talk about that, and then I have a couple slides on attachment theory, because this is more recent, more within the last 60 years or so. Attachment theory, depending on who you follow, John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, or what have you, they have categories for attachment, and the premise is that we have physical needs that need to be met, and then we also have connection needs. So all the non-tangibles, right? The emotional, psychological, relational needs that we have to have met from our primary caregiver. And so attachment theory theorizes that pre-verbal experience with our primary caregiver is very influential in determining our attachment styles, our primary attachment styles later in life. And so they give us, our primary caregivers give us like food, and they give us shelter and so on. And so we have, our safety needs met or what have you, but our attachment styles are actually based in the level of attentiveness and care and safety and security that's provided in the non-tangible. So more the emotional, psychological, relational space. So attachment theory would say that the way a parent treats me, like if my parent treated me in a certain way, would determine how I treat others. So if my mother, say my mother was my primary attachment figure, or let's say my aunt was my primary attachment figure, and she was very emotionally available, and she met my physical needs and my emotional needs, and she did this consistently, obviously not perfectly, nobody's perfect, but she did it consistently enough for me to believe that that was the common way in which I was to be attended to. Then I would end up with that belief, right? The belief that people are generally safe, the world is generally safe, people are dependable, I'm going to have my needs met, and I can ask for help when I need it, and I'm going to get it. And I have confidence that at the end of the day, I can provide for others value, others can provide for me value. I can provide for others delight and joy in the context of relationship, and the same way others can provide me with that as well. So a very positive view of self, very positive view of others. And the alternative would also be true. So if a caregiver teaches me that I'm unworthy, or you're stupid, or you're worthless, or you're useless, and the insults and the name calling and the scripts that we receive, and maybe I'll take that back, because attachment theory is really about pre-verbal experience. So before you even learn to talk, right? So how attentive is the parent or the caregiver to, the cries that you cry? Like, I'm crying and I'm hungry, and my caregiver is all the way over there, or on the cell phone. My goodness, cell phones have changed the game. Social media has changed the game. Having these devices have changed the game for both positive and negative benefits. Or outcomes. But if my caregiver allows me to say cry and cry and cry and cry and cry, then internally I begin to form a working framework of what it is that I can expect from my caregivers. So my people in the world, or people in the world, when it comes to my needs, internally I start to come up with a construct. And this is before, so this is visceral, this is reflexive, this is like internal, right? And so it's not something that I'm cognitively aware of. And so attachment theory would say, if your primary caregivers don't attend to those needs, and you're constantly, crying, or, what have you, and the emotional needs for connection are not met, there's no eye contact, there's no, cooing, there's no holding or rocking, or changing of the diaper, and I'm sitting in my diaper, right? So those kinds of things would give me an internal idea of how safe I am, how secure I am, how close I can get to people, and then of course, if my needs are not met, or how much I can ask for help, right? So if I ask for help, am I confident that I'm going to get it? And it's likely not if my attachment needs are not met. So anyway, all of this determines our attachment styles. We're not going to get into it too deeply. I'm going to show you one more slide, and you can locate yourself. But there's lots of attachment style quizzes and whatnot. And if you want one, you can throw your email in the chat, and I'll send it out to you, because it's very interesting stuff, very interesting, theoretical explanations and so on. But the point is that our sense of security and safety is really dependent on our, or I should say, contributes to our ability or capacity to be close to other people. So for proximity, as well as how we manage ourselves when we are far from people or when we're separated from other people. So I think I have Bowlby's categorizations here. Yeah. So anyway, there's basically secure and insecure attachment, depending on your theory or your theorist. The other insecurely attached labels would be preoccupied, fearful, or dismissing. You could also be secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. But in any case, what you really want to note is the difference between, or where you find yourself on the spectrum or on the continuum of your idea about others and your idea about yourself. Okay, so those are the only two things you really need to know. What are your ideas about other people, and what are your ideas about yourself? Okay, so a secure person has really positive ideas about other people and very positive ideas about self. So you love yourself, you're confident in yourself, you can, love yourself, what have you. And you also have positive ideas about other people. You love other people, you trust other people, you can ask for help and have your needs met. Whereas if you have, say, a negative model for self or a negative model for other people, right? So if you have a positive model for self, but a negative model for other people, then you'll be highly dependent, dismissing other people. Other people can't be trusted. I can't ask for help. My needs are not going to be met. I have to do everything by myself, super independent. And a lot of us are like this, right? Because we've been let down by other people. But we have to go back to, where we learn some of these visceral responses, right? And so part of attachment theory is noting that a lot of them were actually formed before we learned how to speak and think and come up with critical ideas for ourselves. So I want to throw out some stats for us, and I'll be mindful of the time here before we sort of jump in. And as you guys are listening, maybe just throw out in the chat if anything sort of piques your interest, or jot down any questions that you might have, or anything you want to share. You can always jump in. I'm super open to that, especially some of these, ideas that are kind of cool to hear about. So here's some stats that I thought were interesting and perhaps informative of the not just the nature versus nurture argument, or debate, but the level at which nature or nurture affect and apply to us, or affect and influence us as we grow. So here's 3 quotes. Identical twins who grow up in the same home with the same parents turn out about 45% the same and 55% different. So these studies have been done over and over and over, and they find the same things, find the same results. So this gives us insight into this nurture versus nature thing. Twins grow up in the same household, nurture, but they're only 45% the same, nurture. And 55% different would include all of the other stuff that influences their personality development and so on. So that's nature, that's environment. And so because of the conversation that we're having, it's important to note where parenting comes into play. Which part does parenting play, right? Parenting is not all nature and not all nurture, right? Parenting is, of course, genetics. You birth children, and even if they're not your children, and if they are not your children, then it's nurture, right? So how much does your influence as parents, or parents' influence on us, shape how we become, how we develop, how we live in the world, how we respond, how we react, and so on. So this statistic tells us that parents don't have the final authority or the final say. They matter a lot, but environment actually matters more long term. So that's just one quote to sort of think about. And then research suggests that outside of major traumas, our peers and our social life have 20 to 50% more influence, and that's a broad range, on our self-perception, our self-worth, and who we eventually become than our parents do. So this, again, after many studies, and I've researched many different arguments and many different conversations about this, they say that 20, 50% more influential is our nature, the things that we find ourselves connected to outside of our parents. So this is very different from, say, traditional views and ideas, historical views and ideas, psychological and theological views and ideas, as well as attachment views and ideas. So definitely some influence, but not the most influence on our development is where parents come in. And the last quote says, things thought to be especially vulnerable to influence in the first 5 to 7 years, so our formative years as children, include language, food preferences, religious beliefs, and enduring personality traits. So the things that really do stand the test of time as it pertains to our parental influence is more sort of this surface type stuff, right? So the language that we speak or the food preference, things that people can see immediately off the bat. So not necessarily, and I'll show you a quote in a second, not necessarily sort of the underlying sort of beneath the surface of the, I'm seeing the iceberg in my head, but beneath the surface stuff. And you know what? I have a curiosity because I'm thinking about this now. And I remember a friend of mine saying, like, I was a bad kid. Like, I caused all kinds of trouble. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how much does the opposite, how much does the other way around actually affect parents? Like if parents have, kind of calm children and children who are, sort of generally like laughable or happy or what have you, like, does that determine and influence parental styles for child rearing? And then if you have like sort of a child who's more colicky or, more, a little bit more cryy or whatever, literally a cry baby, like, will that influence frustration that maybe a more insecure or dysregulated parent would then be non-responsive or less responsive emotionally, right? So I don't know. I'm sort of just throwing it out there and thinking about it as we go along. But yeah, so these are types of parenting. And then I want you guys to just sort of maybe jump in and think about like your own experience of parenting and where you found yourself. Like what kind of parents did you have? If you are a parent, what kind of parent do you lean into being? Types of parenting, these are very popular. I'm sure you've heard them before. Authoritative is more like positive, enforcing the rules, but still, firm on the discipline, but still open. Authoritarian is more like negative, discipline, punishment, like, you need to be obedient, very heavy, like on the control. Neglectful, self-explanatory, not necessarily paying too much attention to the child, which is very easy today when we spend lots of time on social media and on our devices and at work and doing all the things. Permissive is more like non-enforcing of rules. So more like kids will be kids and like, kind of that very light, like, oh, everything is fine. And, let the kids run, do whatever they want, develop into themselves and explore all of the different genders and all the things, right? So very, very, very open, very, very open. Maybe our society might call it liberal. I don't know. And then overprotective would of course be more closed, more of a closed context, where we disallow our children from exploring and sort of being out there in the world. And then the power struggle, has to do with who actually wears the parental role within the context of the relationship. So these are more parenting styles. I don't know, maybe you guys can throw out there what kind of parenting style you guys are used to, or what kind of parent you would prefer to be. Yeah, I don't know, maybe you guys can jump in and share your thoughts and ideas about that. Anyone sort of have a query or a question or a thought or a comment?
I'm a first. Well, I'll say I've been a parent for probably 6 years now, with a son, and I find myself more of the authoritative type, not an authoritarian, but authoritative, and at times, sometimes overprotective. Right, it kind of kind of flux between the two. Overprotective, not in the sense where I disallow everything, but it's just there's certain things that, you know what, it's just not, I don't think it's right for them at this stage, or I would try to guide it a certain way. So I guess I still fall more under the authoritative portion, but like and the parents, and that's parents style that was passed down to me because my parents were the same way, right? So in some ways you can be permissive depending on the season, the time, what's going on, right? So you kind of flux between a number of these maybe, right? But not the permissive along the lines where, you know, anything goes, love is love, that kind of stuff, right? Permissive in the sense that, you know what, pick your battles, right? Because being raised in a Canadian context, but with Caribbean parents, they sometimes still want to jump in and tell you how to parent your child. But
Yep.
the context versus them coming here versus you being here, and now you have your first fully Canadian child, it's different. And so they would say things along the line like, you know what, when I was raising you, I did it this way and that way, right? But then my response, because of my experience and stuff, is I say I pick my battles, right? Right. There's certain things that you can let go, which is not so that we don't have to be so uptight about, right?
Yeah.
And I find, especially speaking from a Caribbean background, I think that Caribbean culture, and I'm speaking just from my experience, can be somewhat a little bit overarching, if that's the right word, right? We are quick to discipline our kids, right? And especially in public settings, because we don't want them to, you know, embarrass us or to be labeled as such and such, right? And some of that comes from not just Caribbean culture, but just the experience as a racialized person. I think it's the term they use these days, where you feel hyper visible at sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And that's the struggle that's there. And I get where they're coming from, because again, Johnny could do it, right?
Right.
But the moment that Tyrone goes to do it, right, everyone's like, what's going on here, right? So
Yep.
it's just finding that balance in there, because again, moving through this, being located in a racialized body, right, you stand out at various points, right?
Yep.
And that's the thing where even when trying to raise your child, you're trying to help them be as Canadian as possible, the freedoms that come along with that identity, right? But at the same time, making them aware that although you may be second generation Canadian, right? It might not necessarily be perceived that way or received in that
Yep.
sense.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And that sounds like the balancing act. So, you know, for you, really being able to embody what you received as parenting, as a parenting model, growing up, and being able to emulate that. So there was something valuable and helpful and forming or formative about having authoritative parents that you took then and gave to your son, right? And so
Yeah.
there's that, and then there's, you know, so that sort of what you're describing here, certain perhaps attachment styles or parenting styles are more prominent in certain cultures, um, maybe because of the social messages or societal messages or constructs that contribute to, um, you know, the ideas or stereotypes or prejudices or biases pertaining to, you know, particular cultures. So, you know, I sort of, yeah, thank you for sharing that thought and that experience, right? Because um, it's not it's sort of like a question of like what really happened with our parents and how they experienced themselves in the world that then contributed to how they taught us in the world, and then being able to make the distinction between what they experienced, and then how of course they disseminated that to what you are now experiencing, right? So first generation Canadian, and now I have a fully Canadian child, right? Two generations removed. So it matters actually. It matters, you know, how you teach and how you model both your culture and heritage, and also how you integrate, you know, the Canadian culture or what have you. And then it's sort of a wonder about, um, you know, what kinds of, yeah, like does it matter if you grew up in a particular culture when it comes to um, attachment style and pre-verbal experiences. Like I just kind of thought of that when you were speaking. Like um, do certain, like if you're in a family where you are a parent and you have so much adversity to deal with, living in a racialized body, or you're a first generation or what have you, like does that take away from a lot of your capacity and ability to offer attention or whatever have you in a disciplined way? um yeah, just sort of thinking about that. That's a really
Yes, yeah.
yeah. What did you say?
It does have a role to play. It does impact the way you do things.
Yeah, yeah,
It does.
definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And then it sort of goes back to, how you then form your ideas about yourself, like your identity as a person. Like who
Right.
are you? Are you, you know, like this, like who are you? Are you Caribbean? Are you Canadian? Like what do you lean into in terms of your identity?
Right.
Um,
And like you highlighted earlier, that your peers have the strongest influence in the end,
mhm,
right? And then I thought that was a really good point right there, right? They do. And so, for instance, I mean, you ask me, I say to people, I'm Canadian, right? Right. If you
mhm,
ask my wife now, she identifies as Caribbean, right? And now picture that us trying to raise our son, because I said that, I'm fully Canadian. I don't have the experience of being raised in the Caribbean, right? I
right.
am Canadian. But in her mind, she is Canadian Caribbean, right? But I said our son, he is Canadian, right? But we have those viewpoints of how we're trying to in our own home construct of how we want to raise our son. And I get what she's trying to say as well, and hers is still very valid as well as mine, right? But those are all the factors that kind of play into it. So I guess again, when it comes to immigration and immigrant families, right? This is probably something that plays out in many households, not just Caribbean households, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's definitely a conversation that is not necessarily top of mind for people, like just how we integrate some of these ideas that have been provided to us in society into our parenting and child rearing or modeling for our kids how they are to be in the world and teaching them, just about like who they are, right?
Right.
What identity do they attach to?
Right.
Um,
But your
yeah,
peers really just your peers really influence that. That's just the biggest
yeah.
deal, right? And for instance, okay, you've got groups, okay, and I'm just going based on my experiences, right? So in the area that I'm raised, we were raised in Durham Region, Pickering, right, which
Mhm.
back in the 90s was predominantly an Anglo kind of a setup, right? We originally came from Scarborough, right, which is more diverse, right?
Mhm.
And you look at Scarborough and you look at Durham now, right, and your peers, right, you find that in Scarborough, more people will identify in a certain group, right?
Yep.
It's just in Durham, in order to integrate, right, you kind of shed certain identities, so you're more of the so you can become more, it's the word sameness, right, to identify
Yeah.
with those who don't necessarily
Homogenous.
look like you, but yeah, right, along those lines. So it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, when you talk about it in the frame of peers, you kind of you kind of have to, in a way, shed some of those sort of salient qualities in order to fit in, call it
Right,
that, because we have a natural, and this is what relationships is all about, right? We have a natural affinity to belonging and to connection and to attachment,
right,
and so we lean towards that, and whatever we need to do to to get more of that, we usually we make the sacrifices we need to, and that's
right,
of course very evident in how we create friends and community.
right.
Um, so yeah, definitely a good point, and that sort of brings me to this maybe next point, just as it relates to what we use to determine some of these homogenous qualities, right? So when we look at other people, And I see it as somewhat of a barrier because, and perhaps we can talk about this as well. Like, what, if anything, is difficult about these ideas that we're even talking about today, um, especially as adults who sometimes blame our parents for um, for however we are, right? So when we look at creating groups and creating community and creating belonging, we're looking at more of the surface stuff. We're looking at, our thoughts, feelings, preferences, choices. Like, do you play basketball? Do you play basketball? Do you go to church? Do you go to church? Do you live on my street? Do you live on my street? So proximity and homogeneity are very important to us in our peer groups, and help to reinforce some of the ideas, but also challenge some of the ideas that we've developed based on our parental experience. And so, if I have been in a family where there's not necessarily a lot of responsiveness or affection, what have you, and then I find myself in a group where there's a lot of that, then that can challenge and change and reshape my original attachment styles. And I think, and my original attachment styles and my ideas basically about myself and about the world. And I think that's what's really cool about confronting, some of these ideas, especially long held ideas, um, that yes, we can acknowledge the incredible power that parents have, um, over us and in our lives, but we can also recognize that at some point there is a shift, and there is supposed to be a shift, to us developing for ourselves what we prefer and what would satisfy our lives going forward. And so, the gaining of autonomy, or the adulting process, really helps us and allows us to decide, like, how much am I going to take from this, and how much am I going to begin to now be responsible for and build for myself. And I think the iceberg picture gives us a really good foundation to sort of build on, right? Because we're talking about all the stuff that's above the surface. And then there comes a point where we need to decide. And that's the stuff that's beneath the surface. That's our own job, our own work in doing our reflection, and really coming up with, a better or more satisfying, sorry, way of being in the world, that we don't attribute to our parents, or we don't attribute to, our growing up years or what have you. Like, we literally say to ourselves, no, we can do this for ourselves now. So yeah, that's really interesting. This is, I think, I want to say this is probably the last slide. And I want us to, so this is my question, I guess my question: where can you continue to challenge the long held beliefs that you have about life, about yourself, about parents, if they are not serving you, right? And so I do get a chance to work with a lot of clients, and a lot of clients have parent issues, or are parents and have issues as parents. Oh my gosh, my goodness, I'm gonna mess up my children, or oh my goodness, my parents messed me up. And so sometimes it's good to sort of shake up our ideas here, and be like, wait a minute, hold on. At some point, we have to come to terms with, yes, the stuff we had to face growing up as children and helpless, but also, what do we do now? And of course, I work with people in therapy, so they're obviously working at that moment and at that time. And I don't doubt that anybody who would show up for a conversation like this would be in that place where they're willing to sort of think more deeply about, some of the ideas that they've come up with. But yeah, these are just some ideas of where to start when it comes to, sort of challenging, some of our ideas about parenting, and as parents and as children of parents, especially if there's been difficulty. I say read books, and I brought two of my favorite books. Like, these are literally my two of my favorite books. This is called Family Ties That Bind. It's a really janky picture on the top or on the cover, but it's actually a really great book. It says a self-help guide to change through family of origin therapy. And it's really comprehensive. It's very easy to read, and it's actually fun. Like, there's a few really cool things in there. So if you want to start sort of debunking some of the ideas that you've had with regards to parenting, and even just get a better or deeper understanding and awareness of your parenting experience, how it's affected you, and your so parenting experience with your parents and you being a parent, and then how you can do the best for your children. Like, this is actually a really great book, Family Ties That Bind. And then of course, a lot of people are, this is called Attached. A lot of people, and it's actually when it comes to romantic relationships, but a lot of people are unaware of how attachment styles actually contribute to our romantic relationships, what we pursue, what we allow, what we tolerate, what we desire, what we do, how we show up. So Attached is actually a really good book. It's the new science of adult attachment and how it can help you find and keep love. I think that's just a sort of a plug, but it's actually really good. So you can grab it, pick it up, and read it, but it'll just give you more insight and understanding, more awareness into yourself, and how you can wrestle with some of the ideas that do, come up. And then of course the rest of them, therapy, SAQs are self-awareness questions. That's sort of what we get a chance to do in conversations like this, right? So really trying to figure out the introspective experience of being a child or being a parent, and some of the constructs that have either helped us or hindered us. Quizzes would include like attachment quizzes or personality quizzes, whatever. Again, insight, awareness, self-understanding is really where to begin when it comes to all in any of these activities. And then a genograms are like psychological family trees, so they give us insight into the roles that we've played, some of the rules that we've had in our families and how they shaped us. Highlights any mental illness, sickness, things that like trauma, things that have really impacted and affected parenting styles, and our experience of parenting and family. And then of course journaling and reflecting is by far probably the single most and free most helpful exercise and activity or discipline that we can engage in to sort of expand and grow as whole and functional adults. And that's it for me. I just wanted to sort of highlight some of those things. I heard a quote the other day. It was True adulthood is letting go of the notion that your parents, what was it? True adulting or true adulthood is letting go of the notion that your parents are responsible for all your problems. So basically, parents, it's all your fault. And so today I want us to sort of take away that we do have agency, we do have power, we do have capacity, that our parents have contributed, of course, to our way of being, but that we have more authority and power to change that and affect that in really powerful and positive ways at this point in our lives. And yeah, we can take blame out of the picture. And I know, again, parents, it's all your fault is a very interesting sort of conversation title, but really wanting to encourage us to take blame out of the equation, right? Even off of ourselves, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna, mess up my kids or what have you, but taking blame out of the picture, and just really allowing ourselves to question, to accept, and maybe even to grieve or to let go of some of the ways that we've been hurt, or we've hurt others in relationship. What do you guys want to take away? I don't know. What's your takeaway today? What do you want to, I don't know, take with you?
Hey, Jenny.
Hi.
Hi. I'm like, I made it. I think what I really liked about this is just gave me language. I think and for me, that's a good first place to start. I think we feel or don't feel what we feel. And this overview just, it gives me language to kind of put some constructs to what I think, what I believe, how I respond. So for me, I feel like that's what I'm going to take away is a better understanding of how I can articulate my views on how I was parented,
Yeah.
how it's impacted me, and what are some things that I have to work through.
Yeah.
Because as you said, I am as an adult empowered to adjust where I think there needs to be some corrections.
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. That's huge,
Mhm,
right? Yeah. Definitely with the and this is the funny thing about like naming things and about
mhm,
talking about things. Like sometimes when we stay silent on things, it's like they don't exist, but we know they exist. Like we feel it in our bodies and in our
mhm,
bones, but like without the words and even the space, like the platform to just
mhm.
talk about it as a normal, sort of thing, it's like it's almost like it just stays like locked up on the inside of us. So I love that. Yeah, just being able to walk away with language and to describe, some of the internal sort of emotional experiences that we have.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
We have a
So thank
chat.
you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Kenny says, I like the attachment styles. Excellent. Yes, attachment styles. So I use attachment therapy a lot, or attachment theory a lot within my therapeutic model. Um, and I find it super helpful. And also, I think because of my own belief system, like my own personal philosophy on life and where my faith is, my spiritual beliefs lie, that attachment theory actually fits very well with that. The idea, hey, we are created for relationship, we are created for connection, and we actually do the best, and we actually um, are at our best when our relationships are good, when we have those kinds of connections and the level of depth and intimacy, feelings of belonging and knowing others and so on, in a really healthy and quality way. That's when we are at our best, right? That's when we feel our best. That's when we are living in purpose. That's when like all of that stuff. And I think attachment theory, because it talks about that since or from the beginning of our inception, pretty much, that it's really foundational for how then we can become repaired or we can receive healing, right? And so if we are damaged in relationships, then we receive healing in relationships, and that's what therapy is all about. And I love the model, because it gives us understanding. It helps us, again, as Natasha said, to like name things and give us language to describe like some of what we're going through. Like, oh, I'm insecurely attached, that's probably why. Or I'm anxiously attached, that's probably why. When I text my husband or my girlfriend or what have you, and they don't text back in 2 minutes, I get like, oh my gosh, why aren't you texting me back? What are you doing? Are you cheating on me? Are you leaving me? Are you gonna break up with me? Like we go like, to the nth or to the most, I don't know, the worst case scenario. But being able to move away from, say, pathologizing that behavior or those reactions as like something's wrong with me, to, oh, okay, I get it, I've developed an anxious attachment style, and so now, because attachment styles are not fixed, I can begin to work on developing and practicing habitual behavior that's more aligned with secure attachment. And so, yeah, I think that's it's really helpful to sort of frame it in those terms, especially when it comes to relationships. Because listen, the world rises and falls on relationships. Everything is about relationships, guys. Songs are about relationships, movies are about relationships, TV is about relationships, our relationships are about relationships. Everything's about relationships. So we might as well learn how to do them well. That's my little spiel. Anybody else want to throw something out there before we start to wind down here?
Well, thanks, Jen, for this session. I mean, the whole attachment thing, somehow I think I knew that instinctively, but without having words to really verbalize it. Like you've given us the words to make it tangible, as to what's actually going on there. I mean, even with presenting my son, I mean, I realized that that's how we responded to him, like his cries, stuff like that. And as a result, you'll notice that he might be a little more attached than we like him to be. And so we're kind of doing some things. And that's the other thing that could happen as well. Like how you respond shapes the way they will interface with the outside world,
Yes.
right? So for instance, now, I mean, he's 6 and we still have a hard time getting him to sleep by himself, right? He'll
Mhm.
get up and he'll come over because the attachment's still that strong, but we have to kind of enforce that now. Like, hey, you're 6, you can right? But it's just great to for sessions like this because it just gives us the tools in which to really do an introspective or analysis of your thought processes of why you're doing what you're doing and why you're getting back what you're getting back from your child as well, right? Because
Yeah.
it's give and take, and like so what's the word I'm thinking about? Input, output, input kind of thing, back and forth, right? So exchange of information and data, and again, when you put into data packets, you expect a certain result, but when you get a different result, why is that? And so yeah, I just want to say thank you for inviting me
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I absolutely love this. I love having these conversations and talking and getting, different perspectives. And when you say like, oh yeah, I noticed I'm getting something back. If you're not getting what you want, then you have to go back into yourself and be introspective and be like, okay, what am I putting out? And even with your son, it's like, hey, you're providing, and this is a very big part of it, right? You're providing a secure base for him. But secure base usually allows for kids to feel comfortable exploring, or and I don't know if you guys want to throw your emails in the chat, then I'll send you the strange situation, or you can look it up on Google. The strange situation. It's a research method, but it's basically this: like, if your kids feel comfortable with you there exploring the world and sort of venturing off and so on, you've provided for them a secure base that they can come back to. If they're sort of anxious and scared, they don't want to leave, they're sort of like no, and they're afraid of the world, then maybe the security that you've provided is sorry, the level of security that you're providing is inadvertently giving the message that the world is a scary place, right? And so security at home is most important, but the world is a really scary place. Not that security at home is here, go explore the world and we'll always be here, right? And so there's a fine line with the messaging that we share with our kids, and sometimes we just don't notice. I experienced my mother as extremely anxious, like extremely anxious, but it comes off in a very like almost like an arrogant way, like don't bother to do that, don't bother to do that,
Yeah.
but it's also very like I'm scared,
Yeah.
I'm scared, right?
They cloak it in that, right? Yeah. They cloak their fear inside of that hard exterior sometimes, right? And that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, great for us to be able to have these conversations and talk and come up with new language and new ideas. Let me see, what do I have here? Okay, so next week, let me give you guys a heads up. We're going to be talking about me, myself, and I. This is the relationship with self. Woo! And I personally, okay, so disclaimer, or maybe not disclaimer. I personally think this is the second most important relationship, because I believe that, and people will disagree, right? The love, what is it? Love your neighbor as you love yourself, or like do unto others as like done unto you, is like the golden rule thing. And this is like the premise. I see so many memes and quotes on this. If you don't love yourself, you can never love somebody else properly. Anyway, I definitely think it's a very important relationship. I think it's one that we neglect a lot of the times. And I think it's one that we believe is like organic or automatic. Like we should just know ourselves without having to do any work. Like we've grown up and we just know ourselves. But I find that, especially in the context of therapy, that self-awareness is really low, like really lacking. And even for myself, when I started this work a decade ago, over a decade ago, I was like, yeah, I think I'm pretty self-aware. And boy, oh boy, did I get a rude awakening, right? No, it's like self-awareness is so taken for granted. No, we have to do the digging, like in the iceberg, right? We have to go past the initial thoughts and feelings that we have to some of the repressed things, to some of the constructs. So a lot of us are like, oh, this is just the way I am. This is my personality. This is how I've learned to respond. I'm angry, I lash out at people, I cuss people off, all the things. And then you get to the point where you have to realize, like, no, this is actually not just the way I am. Like, I get to choose these things, and I have to become aware of how I've chosen them so I can choose something different to be better or be greater or be my best self, or, you know, live my best life, all these wonderful things that we hear and see. But yeah, we're going to have a conversation about it. Me, myself, and I next week, same time, lunchtime, Thursday, Eastern time, 12 o'clock. And just like, yeah, chat about it and see what comes up in and surrounding, you know, the relationship that we are building with ourselves. I want you guys to, this is Mentiverse, download the Mentiverse app. That is the app. We'll throw up all of the conversations, all of the relationship series conversations under the relationships tab. So you can find the replays there. Natasha, thank you so much for being here. Yes, see you next week. Download the app if you guys want the replay. It should be up there by tomorrow. And if you want to, you can leave some of your comments in the survey, and you can win a prize if you fill out the survey first. And so you can go there to the survey, whatever it's called, and fill it out, the survey link, and fill it out. And then, yeah, see if you win a prize for next week. But yeah, that's it for me. And I just want to thank you guys so much for being here, for showing up, for your input, for sharing, and for making this something that's important to you, making it like a valuable thing to talk about relationships. Because I think also that a lot of us, we don't learn about how to do relationships well, but we also have an idea about relationships that says they just, like, good relationships just happen naturally, like they just happen, and that we don't have to put in the kind of effort and thought and work that we might put into our job, or you know, other areas of our lives, like researching for a house, let's say, or or a car. Sorry. So yeah, we don't always put the amount of sort of value and effort into it as I think we could. And of course, you know, we just kind of have this thing, like, things just happen and chemistry just happens. But if you talk to anybody who's been married for any length of time, you know, you have to put effort in, you have to put energy in, you have to put time in, you have to put thought in. And it's just the same with any other relationship that we want to be good and quality and healthy in our lives. We have to put the time in, whether it's relationship with God, ourselves, our spouses, our parents, our friends, whoever, right? So that's where that's where my heart is and where my passion is. And that's where I end off today. So I'd love to hear your feedback. And again, want to thank you guys for making this a valuable part of your day, and then of course of your existence. So thank you guys so much for being here. Relationship series. What are we doing next week? Me, myself, and I will see you then. Have a very great rest of the day.
Thanks, Jen.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.